If talks on a report on silent diplomacy with Theodor today.
Hey, Leonard, thanks for having me.
What do you have for us today?
I've got an interview with Vanni Xuereb.
Who is Vanni Xuereb?
Yeah, he's the ambassador of the Republic of Malta to Berlin.
What did you talk about?
We've talked about all sorts of things, mainly how he got into diplomacy, so his career pathway. Afterwards, we talked about how Malta established their foreign relations and their diplomatic service after their independence in the midst of the last century. And at last, we talked about recent activities such as the Maltesian Conference on Ukraine.
And what did you learn from that conversation?
I've learned mainly one thing, and that there's a lot to do in diplomacy.
That sounds right. Let's take a look into that.
Please note, the views presented by the persons involved are their own and do not necessarily represent either the views of APA's think tank or their own institution. Mr. Xuereb, thank you for inviting us to your lovely embassy located right next to the Tiergarten here in Berlin. And thank you for taking your time to answer some questions, because we as a student think tank are representing some students who study political affairs, international relations, international conflicts, and therefore would like to know what kind of diplomacies different states are pursuing. And for that, we started reaching out to diplomats and embassies to kind of get a background review what they think is the diplomacy. But before getting to the diplomacy in essence and politics later, I would like, first of all, to get to know you personally better. We've just been introduced ourselves, and you've been in Berlin for quite some time. So why did you choose diplomacy as a career?
Well, first of all, let me also start by thanking you for this also invitation to me. I mean, we as the small countries don't get so many opportunities because obviously, you know, our opinion or what we think about major international crisis, etc., doesn't always make the headlines. Unlike what is the case with larger countries than us. So thank you for this opportunity. Well, diplomacy was something I always that always interested me from you know from my university days. So I studied law, and while I was studying law at the University of Malta, I was very active in student politics, and you know, I was already there seeking to engage on the European and international level. I remember that we negotiated the accession of our student union Malta to the what is today the European Students' Union, what was then ESIP.
Yeah.
So I was one of the pioneers there, and
what time was that? Time frame?
Well, I'm talking here of the 80s, of the 1980s. So
I see. Yeah.
Quite a while ago. So the Berlin Wall was still up, and Germany was still divided. We still had the Soviet Union around. So very different times. In fact, that was also reflected in international student politics at the time, because there were two rival European, at least, or international student organization, one with a more Western. In fact, ESIP was initially WESIP, West European Students Information Bureau, countering what was then ISMUN, which was seen to be very much under the influence of the student organizations in the former communist countries.
So Cold War between the students.
Yeah, so also Cold War, also called, and this was mostly reflected, for instance, in France, where you had two rival student unions. One was UNEF, one was UNEF-ID, and so one was leaning towards kind of the communist bloc, towards the ISMUN, and the other one was more in the mold of Western, although of course students' union, even in the Western countries, were known for their left-wing leanings. You know, I mean, think of I don't know, Wilfred Martens in Belgium leading the student protests in Belgium.
Was that the first time you thought about trying to mediate between certain political agendas, between different positions, thus one could say being kind of in the diplomacy of there?
Well, it was definitely an opportunity for me to learn how things happen on that level. I mean, there was some sort of diplomacy. I mean, if we are going to agree on a resolution or on a joint statement, I mean, it's a lot of negotiation, a lot of give and take, compromise. And of course, a lot of that happens not out in the open during the plenary, but sometimes in the bars and in the individual hotel rooms or hostel rooms or whatever. So that's where you get an initiation. But something which I learned at the time, that for a small country like ours, which is indeed, when we say small, Malta is very small.
Yeah.
And I mean, sometimes we think of Belgium, Netherlands as small, but compared to them, compared to us, they are well medium sized.
To kind of give a different, how do you say that, a measurement for our German students, Malta is as big compared to Bremen. I would say
exactly.
Yeah.
Geographically and population wise.
Yeah.
So we are roughly 500,000. So in terms of population, we are slightly smaller than Luxembourg.
I see.
But
Yeah.
I mean, Luxembourg then has a larger geographical area, so we are more densely populated.
But first, coming back to your studies, have you had a specialization in law, which was also pursuing more into this world of diplomacy?
So yes, by the time I had to decide what to write my dissertation about, Malta had started contemplating joining the then European communities, now European Union. And this is why I decided that I was interested in that, and that therefore I actually wrote my doctoral dissertation in Malta on the external relations on the European Union taken from a Mediterranean perspective. So entering, of course, foreign policy in the EU was not yet so much developed. So again, the way the European communities at the time handled external relations was more in terms of trade, which was a very strong already instrument, because trade was already one of the exclusive competencies of the community. So so this is why I did it, and subsequent to that, of course, I was one of the first group of Maltese students who went to study European legal studies at the Collège d'Europe in Bruges. So,
was it part of the Erasmus studies?
No, we weren't part of the European communities at the time, and of course, at the time there was no possibility still for Maltese students. No, it was So prior to that, I served my first stint in a foreign mission, which is in Malta's embassy in Brussels, which was then doubling as embassy to the Kingdom of Belgium, but also as permanent delegation to the European communities. And of course, we were already there trying to establish as much contact as we can with the European institutions in order to prepare the way for our eventual application, which came in 1990. But I was serving at the delegation in Brussels, and I still remember that the ambassador then was very keen on pursuing this link with the Collège d'Europe as one of the ways of strengthening our bonds with European institutions, or institutions that are closely affiliated with the European institutions. And he managed to obtain 5 places for Maltese students in the academic year and the following academic year. And he also he said, I know I will lose you from the embassy, but I see you very much as one of the 5 students. And I did, go there. It was it was the year that was inaugurated with the famous Bruce speech by Margaret Thatcher. It is probably the beginning of Brexit, but anyway.
Coming to politics later, I just want to round up with a last question in regards of your careers or becoming a diplomat, since one major thing about being a diplomat is to serve contacts, to serve communication between people and nations, and therefore also speaking these languages. You speak 4 languages, as I recall.
Well, I speak my mother tongue, Maltese, and
Yes.
English, which is also an official language in Malta. Then I speak Italian. I speak French. I can speak some Spanish because I was posted prior to Germany. I was posted in Spain. And of course, it was much easier to learn Spanish than it was for me to try to learn German. So I have a basic understanding of German, so I can understand a lot
Well, I
of
don't
what is
have a
said.
basic
But,
understanding of Spanish at all, so you kind of advance there. But was that
languages are useful.
useful? But did you have to actively learn them, or was it just an ongoing way, or for the preparation?
Yeah, well, in my case, it happened in a kind of natural way. So with my first 4 languages, those were the languages we learned at school. We Malta, we used to, at my time at least, learn 4 languages. And at the time, they were just these 4, Maltese, English, French, and Italian. With Italian, much easier for us. Why? Because Malta is very close to Italy. We have strong cultural ties with Italy. Plus, at the time, of course, this was not the time when I was growing up. It was not the time of internet or of cable TV or anything, or satellite TV. So the only access to foreign TV stations was to Italian TV. So, and since our local TV stations were very limited, we used to watch a lot of Italian TV, and that's how most of us ended up. I mean, I can speak and understand Italian almost like a native speaker. So
could you still recommend an Italian sitcom from that time?
Oh, an Italian sitcom. Well, I remember a very good one, Raimondo Vianello, and what's her name, and his wife, Vianello. But the show was actually called Vianello, and it's an incredible comedy between these two very good comedians in Italy, and that used to be great.
I guess later in our postings on social media, I guess we link that
Okay,
to the audience.
And Sandra Mondaini, that's his wife. So Vianello and Mondaini, they were married.
Let me interrupt to tell you who this Raimondo Vianello is. His sitcom, Casa Vianello, was aired between 1988 and 2005, and in it he played himself, together with his wife Sandra Mondaini. Now let's continue to listen to the interview to find out how this influenced world politics later.
When now coming to Malta and its diplomacy, also in regards to this multilingual way, we can see that Malta has a history of going as far back as the Phoenicians, Byzantines, Arabs, British, thus being a small country. However, in very different historical and cultural backgrounds, other than other small countries. How does that affect Malta's diplomacy? Where is the strategic focus of that?
Well, for a very long time, the island's geographical location in the center of the Mediterranean, made it a place of strategic importance. So, for many powers that were seeking to dominate the Mediterranean, and maybe beyond the Mediterranean, Malta gave them access. And maybe the finest example of this was during the Second World War, where surrounded to the north by Italy, and to the south by the Axis powers in North Africa. So basically, had the Axis powers, occupying Southern Europe, large spaces of Southern Europe and large spaces of North Africa. Malta was the only allied location. It was in fact what Winston Churchill used to refer to as the unsinkable aircraft carrier. So just to give you an example, of
Yeah.
the strategic importance of the islands, at least at that time. I mean, nowadays we joke about it because we talk about becoming a bridge or being a bridge between Africa and Europe. But today,
But an unsinkable bridge.
Yeah. But I mean, today with today's technology, they don't need more.
Yeah,
I mean, things fly over us, over our heads, at a very fast pace. But yeah, I mean. Of course, we only became responsible for our own affairs in 1964 in terms of at least foreign policy. Malta became independent from the British Empire, well, from the United Kingdom. I think it had already ceased to be an empire by 1964, on the 21st of September 1964. Although we had some degree of self-government prior to that. But in terms of course, of our gaining the power to determine our own foreign policy, that was in 1964, and so that is when we really had to start trying to exercise our newly gained status as an independent country bilaterally with other countries, and also multilaterally, of course, especially within multilateral organizations such as the United Nations and the Council of Europe.
Being a small country, what are challenges and opportunities in regards of reaching out and starting as of by the second half of the last century, by starting as of foreign relations, foreign affairs?
Well, I still recall, I mean, I was born just before Malta's independence, so just a few months. So I don't remember, I don't recall directly the first, but I know people who were involved in the setting up of the foreign ministry. So our foreign office started with just a few people. For the first, I think, until 1981, it was also part of the. So the prime minister used to double as minister for foreign affairs. So we only had, I think it was only in 1981 that we actually had a person appointed as minister of foreign affairs, separate, who was not the prime minister. So, but the foreign office, and we started, of course, establishing immediately bilateral relations, diplomatic relations. I believe with Germany it was 1965, so it was one of the first. With the Federal Republic of Germany, of course, at the time. Eventually, even with the German Democratic Republic, we did establish diplomatic relations. We applied to join the United Nations. We applied to join the Council of Europe. We immediately started negotiating an association agreement with the European Communities, which was signed in 1970, so just a few years after independence. So although we started small, but I mean, things picked up. We started opening embassies in other countries, starting with the most obvious ones, such as London and Rome. Of course, we opened in Bonn, we opened in Paris.
I could kind of sense this pioneer spirit. Starting from the very, very bottom, or
yes.
a scrap piece of paper, and then starting the strategic concept, and also starting the offices, right?
Yeah. But I think we also had a vision.
What was it?
Our vision was that to prove that as a small country, a small independent country, we could also contribute on the international stage. That we were not insignificant, just to be ignored, because we are so small. So I mean, immediately after independence, for instance, in the United Nations, we came up with an initiative that eventually led to the UNCLOS, to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, because in our then permanent representative in the United Nations made a famous speech in the General Assembly stating that the seabed is the common heritage of mankind. So that eventually led to UNCLOS, which was, I believe, signed in 1973.
Which got its tribunal in Hamburg.
Yeah,
sitting in Hamburg.
Exactly.
Like getting You talk now about a lot of opportunities which
Mhm.
were set, but what were difficulties?
Yeah.
I could sense that not everybody had heard
No,
of Malta
no, no,
by
and
1980, and
not even by today.
this is yes.
I mean, today more people know about Malta because we are part of the European Union.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Undoubtedly, joining the European Union has given a new relevance to our sovereignty and to our independence. Why? Because um, being part of the 27, although our strength in the institutions is not equal in the sense that we are not so, we have fewer MEPs in the European Parliament, although the president of the European Parliament is a Maltese, Roberta Metsola.
Oh yeah.
Yes, of course. And we are hoping that she will probably be reconfirmed if things go well this evening in Brussels. She might actually have a possibility of serving another 2.5-year term as president of the European Parliament. But we participate in all the other institutions, and that is in fact a really good example of how we exert quiet diplomacy. Why? Because we also have a right of veto should we want to exercise it, but we don't, because we don't believe in that. Because we believe in dialogue and we believe in consensus building, and at the end of the day, if we are in a union and we agreed to be in a union, then we have to negotiate and find an agreement and compromise as necessary to find an agreement that is in the interests of all.
I noticed when you speak of diplomatic outreach to some countries, you mentioned the European Union quite a lot.
Yeah.
You got also neighboring countries in the south, meaning Libya.
Yeah.
Egypt is a big player in the region. What is about them?
Well, let's say that I think the two countries where we do concentrate most of our efforts are Libya and Tunisia. I think they are our closest neighbors. The others are of equal importance, of course, but Libya especially. First of all, we have always fostered after independence very close ties with Libya. After independence, that was still pre-Gaddafi, so we had good relations with the regime then under King Idris. But then when Gaddafi came to power, we had a good relationship with Libya and with Gaddafi himself. And after that, even there, we try, with the situation in Libya being what it is, with basically no stable government but rival governments in the different parts of the country. Even there, we try to do our little bit to first of all to not mediate between the parties, but to speak to I mean, our policy is as much as possible we speak to everyone. Of course, there could be times where we would be very careful and prudent who to speak to and how to speak. But we would normally try to reach out or be ready to meet, to listen to, because sometimes we are approached, sometimes we approach, other times we are approached. And we try to do so because we feel that, and this is something we are doing particularly this year as we are chairing the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE. And incidentally, we were asked to do so because there were objections to Estonia, which was the country that was intended to chair the OSCE, but there were objections particularly by the Russian Federation, which absolutely refused Estonia's chair, and however agreed as a compromise on Malta. Why? Because we are part of the EU, but we are not a NATO country, so we are a neutral country. So that seemed acceptable to them. And I've seen how, I've seen our foreign minister, for instance, I was with him, accompanying him in Munich at the security conference. And I could see...
We could have met, actually. We were there as well.
That's good. Well, we'll meet next year, hopefully.
Absolutely.
I could see how he was... he met, he was conscious of all the difficult situations and tensions in different parts of Europe. So he met with leaders from Serbia and Kosovo, with leaders from Azerbaijan and Armenia. So he was he was very keen. And again, the message was that, listen, we have no ulterior motives, and this is perhaps what makes us credible. We have no ulterior motive. I mean, we have no we have no claims and
no higher interest.
No ambitions to dominate the world, or
well, it would be a little bit too ambitious.
Yes. So
but Great Britain also started from an island and got to dominate the world
and became Great Britain.
You spoke about three points, which I, when it comes to the end of this interview, want to take on. First of all, you mentioned the diplomatic ties between Libya, and could you draw an image of what is possible in when exchanging diplomatic ties? What projects were you engaging in? What aims? What ambitions?
Well, for instance, one concrete area where we cooperate with the Libyan authorities is the question of the migration issue.
Yeah.
So this is one issue where we try to work with the Libyan Coast Guard to ensure that as much as possible these vessels with migrants, these vessels which are about to fall apart even when they leave the coast, do not leave the coast, and this way do not endanger the lives of so many people who are willing to try to cross to Europe.
So, with your diplomacy, was able to facilitate the hands-on administrative work.
Yes, and we also, of course, we also try to be, in a way, in inverted commas, a voice for Libya within the European institutions.
I see.
So we because sometimes it's very easy for us to be distracted, rightly so, by what is happening in Ukraine, by what is happening in the Middle East, and forget that just a few kilometers south of the southernmost tip of the European Union, we have a very volatile situation, where other major powers are playing a role. I mean, one of the things we try to do is to see that Libya is free of foreign interference. Other countries are present somehow in Libya, trying to exert their influence, and of course this is one area maybe where Europe needs to be, and we talk of this not just vis-a-vis Libya, but also in other respects, where we need to be more consistent as a European Union in speaking out on foreign policy issues.
Interesting. You mentioned great powers reaching out to states and trying to assert some dependency there, which brings me to the second point I wanted to take on, which is, as our report is called, silent diplomacy. Thus meaning not the diplomacy in the great halls of conferences, but rather in background talks or in communication which is not visible, which might be good or bad, or which has advantages or disadvantages. So how positions Malta in that sense of silent diplomacy?
Yeah, well, I think we are good at that because again, we are not a country that likes to stamp its feet, and and of course there is a time for official statements, and they are made, but I think we see that we can be most effective in bringing people together and trying to bridge distances between various positions and helping to discover or to reach some common ground that could serve as the basis of an agreement in difficult situations. So that is how we do it. And I mean, within the European institutions, but also beyond. I mean, we're doing it, as I mentioned already, in the OSCE. I mean, our foreign minister doesn't trumpet loud. I mean, he does say that he's visited Armenia and Azerbaijan, or that he met the president and the prime minister. But you know, I mean, that's it. I mean, what happens? I mean, when people speak to us, they know that they can speak to us in confidence. That we will not betray them, we will not backstab them in any way, and that we are genuinely concerned and genuinely interested in helping out. Yes, why not? I mean, it is in the interest of all of us at the end of the day that the existing conflicts are resolved somehow in a peaceful manner.
Would you therefore think that bringing people together or communicating between, let's say, foes would be more helpful if, for example, Malta speaks face to face to one party and then to the other, or brings two parties together on one table?
Well, it could work both ways. I mean, we did at one point. I mean, let me mention Armenia, Azerbaijan.
Yeah.
So we did in Munich speak individually to the leaders there present. Soon after, German Federal Foreign Minister Baerbock brought the two foreign ministers together. So that's again another good example of, and of course,
of both approaches.
Which are complementary, and that is why it is important then that we do talk to each other. I mean, and this is part of the EU, of course, is an advantage because our foreign ministers meet regularly, and you know, we must ensure that what one country is doing sustains what the other is doing. You know, vice versa.
No contradiction. That's working. Getting on the last point of this interview, I wanted to take on something which you brought up also right at the beginning of the interview in regards of the neutrality. As I recall it right, you are per constitution a neutral country, thus not siding with huge coalitions. Is that an opportunity or a disadvantage?
Well, let me clarify first of all. Our neutrality is a military neutrality. It's not a political one. So, in fact, the Constitution states Malta as a neutral state, actively promoting peace and dialogue between peoples, you know, and fostering human rights globally, etc. So it's an active neutrality. So it's at the service of peace. It's not a ostrich putting its head in the sand, you know, approach kind of. Let others fight their wars, and we are.
You keep out of that.
So for instance, we have no difficulty, and we immediately condemned Russia's aggression in Ukraine. I mean, it doesn't mean because we're neutral we are bystanders, or you know, we actually hosted one of the conferences that President Zelensky hosted on his peace plan. Recently, we had the peace conference in Switzerland. But prior to that, there were also these conferences for security advisors, etc., security experts of the various countries, and we hosted one of them. And you know, our foreign minister has been to Kiev quite a number of times.
It's me again to tell you what these conferences were the ambassador was talking about. On October 28, 2023, Malta hosted a meeting of security and policy advisors on the formula for peace. One big topic was how to restore the territorial integrity of Ukraine. With that in mind, let's listen to the rest of the interview.
He was present at the conference. Our president was also present at the conference in Switzerland this last weekend. So it doesn't mean that we don't speak out. It just means that we do not form part of a military alliance. Although I also have to say that we have a strong and close relationship with NATO, which is consistent with our constitutional neutrality. But we are ready to undertake any initiative politically and in other spheres that would keep us within what our constitution obliges us to do, so long as the Maltese people decide that this is the way. We know what happened in Sweden and Finland with their neutrality. So, although I do not see, Malta going that way, at least not in the next few years. But you can never say never.
I mean, like, Sweden is kind of an interesting example because its tradition of neutrality goes back like 200 years ago, after the Napoleonic Wars. If I recall it right, and now switching to being how do you say that, a sided nation, because they feel a threat from the east coming. Malta isn't threatened.
Well, so far we don't seem to be threatened. But once again, if we leave the situation south in the north of Africa, we allow the situation to deteriorate, and then we never know what sort of threat some crazy mad man or woman in North Africa and Libya maybe could have in terms of. I mean, we don't think that Malta is a threat to anyone. However, as in the past, the big empires or the big powers thought that it would be good for Malta to be part of, to belong to them for strategic reasons. You never know. I mean, who would have thought Vladimir Putin would actually invade? I mean, he threatened to do it. Nobody took him seriously. Well, few took him seriously, but nobody thought he'd actually do it. But he did it.
With that being said, coming to the last question, what would you say is the diplomatic way of diplomatic way of Malta in the next decade?
Well, I mean, definitely Malta remains committed to pursue its objectives. First of all, its commitment to belonging to the European Union. That is, one of the pillars of our foreign policy. Although European Union is also an internal matter nowadays, not just a foreign affairs. But we are, that is so forming, being committed as EU members, of course, and of also members of others. So we truly believe in multilateralism. We believe in a rules-based international multilateralism.
Okay,
so I couldn't get it right. So in a rule-based order, we believe in the importance of international organizations. Hence our commitment this year and last year, where we are serving as non-permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. It's the second time we've done so since independence, and even there we have, we were crucial, for instance, in obtaining the first UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. So that is, for us, international fora are important fora, and they remain the most important fora where you can bring together different actors, even countries that don't see eye to eye with each other, and try to resolve any possible conflicts in the way they should be resolved, in peaceful manners.
I think that cleared some views in regards of silent diplomacy. And thank you very much again for your time, for the answers, and for the invitation. Thank you very much also to the listeners.
Thank you.